and welcome to episode 3 of Project Milano. In the last episode, we saw my ups and downs of making a start on this build project. I began with Star-Lord's seat, designing it in CAD, 3D printing it, and finally getting it painted and weathered. The seat was a test to find the limits of my printer and experiment with different paint finishes. There are a few things I need to change and improve on, but nothing serious. It came out way better than I'd expected, and I can now move on to the next stage in this build, designing the rest of the cockpit. You may wonder why I started designing Milano with the cockpit. Well, there are a few reasons. Firstly, this is the only part of the ship I have reliable plans for. It'd be crazy to design this section last, and then try and butcher it to fit the rest of Milano. The second reason being the junction between the interior and exterior of Milano. The canopy opening is really complicated, and this needs to be designed as accurately as possible so that everything fits well. Finally, I like getting the difficult bits out of the way early, so I don't have them haunting me through the build. As you'll have seen before, I've been working from screenshots and scavenged images to recreate this gorgeous ship. These images are often pretty low resolution and hard to read, but I found a useful tool to help with that. Upscale is free AI software to download and use, which can increase the resolution and detail of an image. It's quick and easy to use. You just choose the image you want to improve, pick the image type, press the button and wait. It's pretty quick too. With it working well on photos, I thought I'd give it a go on the plans I had for the cockpit. While the results weren't startling, it did make the plans a lot easier to read than the blurry images I had before. These are the cockpit parts for the model I downloaded, which while being fine for 1:144 scale, just don't have the detail I need for 1:48. The cockpit unit will be 230mm or about 9 inches long, so it's a model in its own right. After a lot of toing and froing, this is my design for the cockpit. Fortunately, it's symmetrical, which helps a lot. The floor is in two parts, the rear and the front, which are on different levels. The rear wall is highly detailed and perforated, which will allow for some lighting effects. The back side walls and ceiling are a single unit. The front side walls follow the contours of the canopy frame and took a lot of work to get right. The nose section was a lot easier, as there's a great reference photo for this part. These are the main cockpit parts, with the interior still to be added. I modelled the front floor with all the holes in the surface, but as we'll see later, this wasn't ideal. The front sidewalls were a bit of a nightmare. The geometry of the plans I had didn't make much sense, and the front half looked nothing like the movie set. The more images I looked at, the clearer it became, and I finally ended up with a design that I was happy with. With the main parts designed, I could get them printed on my Anycubic M3 Max. The great thing about this large volume build plate is that multiple large parts can be printed at the same time. And here's all the main cockpit parts from the printer. These are the first test prints to check the design and printability of the parts. There are a few minor errors that I need to resolve, but nothing serious. The main floor printed without distortion, which was a big worry, but the gratings weren't quite right. The front sidewalls printed standing upright on the build plate with no supports and were perfect. The rear wall was also a perfect print, nothing to change here. The front floor also printed without distortion, but I wasn't happy with the detail holes in the surface. What the M3 Max has in build volume, it compromises in resolution, and these holes were just asking too much. It was worth a try, but not a problem, as I have a plan B that fortunately doesn't involve buying a high-resolution printer. The rear walls and ceiling also printed directly on the build plate with minimal internal support. There's loads of detail in this part. Removing all the support structure from these parts was a really easy process, as they were almost all well away from any detail. Here the supports are removed before any post-curing to minimise any damage to the parts. The internal supports to the rear module were a bit fiddly, but nothing I couldn't handle. As part of the design process, I wanted to make the parts as clean to print as possible. I think I've succeeded. The cleaned up parts can now be test assembled for the first time. There is so much detail here that once painted, I'm sure these parts are going to look incredible. They all fit together really well, which is such a relief. But the front floor section was a problem. While being screen accurate, the printer couldn't cleanly reproduce the tiny holes in the surface. I am concerned that after a coat of primer and paint, even a pin wash won't bring out all the holes evenly and it'll look inconsistent. Not good. I could reduce the number and make them larger, but that's just asking for trouble from rivet counters. They could always be drilled out. After all, there's only 1099 of them at 0.28mm diameter. Instead, I'm going to print the floor without the holes, and then add decals to represent them. I think this will actually give a much cleaner result than any 3D printer, and you'll never notice the difference at this scale. Let me know what you think in the comments. Now, onto the rest of the interior. There are 5 seats that make up the interior, plus an array of other parts. The seats are all different, but we'll come to that in a minute. I'm making Milano from the first Guardians movie, where the front seats have the large rear arm units at the back. These aren't present in the second film. The seats are all the same base unit, but with variations. In the front of the cockpit is the instrument panel. This was really difficult to decode from screenshots, but I think I've nailed it. On the side walls of the cockpit are a couple of long pods. These were pretty easy from screenshots, but the further back into the cockpit, the harder it got. On the side walls at the back were 2 large instrument pods. I realised after studying the plans that these were based on the front instrument panel, which made the design process a lot easier. Hanging above these pods are display screens of the same design as those on the front seats. There are also screens hanging down from the canopy frame, but those will come in another episode. Now, let's run through the seat types as seen at the end of the first Guardians movie. Star-Lord's seat is the one I designed in the last episode, and all the others are variants of this master. Here the throttle is on the right and the joystick on the left, together with the screen. Rocket's seat, the right-hand front, is the same seat but with the throttle, joystick and screen mirrored. The rest of this seat is as Star-Lord's. Due to Rocket's size, there are variations of his seat, with controls in different positions, but I'm not going down that rabbit hole. The next seat back is Drax's. This is basically the same as Star-Lord's, but without the rear arm mount and a panel instead. Finally, we have the 2 rear seats that are without throttles, joystick and a base plate. These are angled to face the rear instrument pods, but in the movie they face forwards. Okay, let's see how everything looks with some nice juicy renders. Here I've still got the holes in the front floor, so you can see the effect I'm after. I'm so happy with these. I can really imagine the Guardians in this space, flying the Milano. There's a lot of great detail here that'll come alive once printed and painted. I think this really captures the spirit of the original and inspires me to make it a reality. Let's get these parts onto the printer. Again, I maxed out the build plate, printing lots of spares, all at 10 micron layer height. This is using the same settings I used on the seat in episode 2, so I should get a good result here. Brilliant! A full build plate and no print fails. Plenty of spares as well, just in case I screw something up. Just got to get them off. They come off the build plate really easily with a scraper. I have to be careful of the more fragile parts, but fortunately I don't need to use a lot of force here. These parts have been pre-rinsed in isopropyl alcohol while on the build plate, but still need a thorough clean. To remove any further resin, I squirt the part with IPA and then blow it off with an airbrush. This is just an old pash I use for delicate parts, but for large parts I use an airline from a garage compressor. I learned the hard way that wearing protection is very important. You don't want to leave resin on your skin, as it'll irritate you for days. And here's the full set of interior parts. There are a lot of them. They've now all been thoroughly cleaned with IPA and the airbrush. I've included the original seat here as well, but I won't be using that in the final build. With all the supports removed and the parts cleaned up, this is what we're left with, 23 in total, ready for assembly. I also test printed the canopy frame. This is just to check the fit and find the best orientation for printing. There's a lot of design work still to go on this part. Detail on both the inside and outside still has to be added. I won't finalise the design until I've started work on the main hull, as everything needs to fit seamlessly together. I've now tacked all the parts together with masking fluid, so let's see how the full cockpit looks. The front seats fit neatly into their welds, mirroring each other. I have to be really careful of the delicate screens on these parts, but they do look great. The rear floor has been modified and reprinted to improve the gratings, and it looks spot on with the seats in place. Finally, here's the rear module with the side pods and instruments. There's loads of detail in here. Let's put these parts together. They fit really well, and the back end of the cockpit looks amazing. This really deserves some lighting. The front floor just slides into place. Now I just need to add the rest of the front end. The back wall fits neatly into place, but the arms behind the front seats take a little bit more jiggling, as they have to fit into the rear floor and onto the seat backs. The nose with the instrument panel again just slots into place. Then the two side walls are fitted, completing the cockpit unit. So here it is, designed and printed, but not in paint. That'll come in another episode. I need to get the main hull structure designed and printed first, just in case I need to make changes. So far, progress has been good. I'm confident that the cockpit unit is a really close match to the movie, and can move on to the next stage of this build, the main hull. I don't really go for lighting, but I think lighting the back of the cockpit could be very effective through the rear wall. Let me know what you think in the comments. The canopy frame I test printed earlier fits really well, but I can't commit on that just yet. Another reason for not painting the cockpit is I need a crew, and fortunately I have a plan. Bradley Harris of BRAD Builds has kindly offered to sculpt the Guardians for my Milano. Bradley sculpted Boba Fett for Slave 1 and has a great YouTube channel where you can see more of the processes he uses to create his figures. You can even purchase his files and print your own, so check out his channel and make sure you subscribe. In the next episode of Project Milano, I'll be tackling the main hull. Here's a little teaser for you of what's to come. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Project Milano. If you have, please share with your friends and make sure you subscribe to my channel. It really helps me a lot. So you catch my next video when it goes live, click on the bell icon. If you have any questions about Project Milano, just leave them in the comments and I'll get back to you. Thanks for watching.